My college friends and I were in a state of surprise. We just heard some unexpected news. There's going to be a class about being gay? This was the late 1980s, and we never imagined that a course on homosexuality would be offered, even at our progressive university. But word was getting around, as it did in those days, word of mouth, and it turned out to be true. So several of us decided to register for this unique one-credit class. The official title of the course was Male Homosexuality in Cross-Disciplinary Perspective. The class was offered by a curious combination of 3 departments: social work, women's studies, and zoology. The instructors were an amalgam of gay men who came from even farther afield, such as the Germanic Languages Department and the University Health Service. The class would explore male homosexuality from historical, social, psychological, and biological perspectives. We would meet in a conference room in a campus building that I had never visited, the Primate Research Center. This seemed a little odd, but we are all primates. And for this journalism and history major, it was a building where I was unlikely to run into anyone I knew. This was an important detail in the spring of 1989. I'd come out to most of my close family members and friends by then, but I was far from universally out. I would soon be marketing myself in the world of employment. And in 1989, 20 years after the Stonewall Uprising launched the gay pride movement, I knew that my being gay could hurt my chances of finding or keeping a job. And I knew that legally, there were no protections and nothing I could do about it. So I was planning to keep mum for a while. The professors who organized the course were aware of these challenges. And so on my official college transcript, the gay class with the long name appears simply as Topics in Biology. It turned out that this precaution, while reassuring at the time, was in my case unnecessary. In the 30 years since I graduated from college, no employer has ever once asked to see my transcript. And most of them wouldn't have cared if there was a gay class on it anyway. But it was just 2 weeks ago, right here in the year 2020, that employment discrimination against LGBTQ people was finally made illegal across the entire United States. This literally just happened. And it's been a long, long journey toward that aspect of equality. Today is the 51st anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising in New York City. And today I want to talk about the loud and sometimes messy ways that progress and change have come about. I want to give credit where it has been overdue. And I want to challenge all of us in these times of turbulence and protest and inequality to make sure that disruption is in our toolbox for change, and to understand the many ways that change happens. First, I want to say a couple more things about the gay class. For one thing, it's worth mentioning that in a class about male homosexuality, I did not receive an A. The grade I got, the equivalent of an A- or B+, is an excellent metaphor for that coming out period of my life. I never felt like I was acing it. I seemed to receive better life grades and better acceptance from straight people. And outside of a small circle of close friends, I didn't generally feel like I fit in with the broader gay culture, which often struck me as reckless, superficial, or over-the-top dramatic and outrageous. You may have heard of The Best Little Boy in the World, the famous 1970s autobiography of a closeted gay man. The strategy implied by the title, of being well-behaved and friendly and productive, so that my only flaw would be my sexual orientation, had served me fairly well. Family, friends, and later employers were almost uniformly accepting of me when I came out. It didn't hurt that I had basically always been well-behaved and friendly and productive. And it definitely didn't hurt that I had an array of privileges afforded to white men. Like many gay men of privilege, I sometimes wished that the more out there members of the LGBTQ community would calm down and tone it down. Surely their paths through life and mine would be easier if they would just try to fit in a little better. Then maybe I could stop having to explain to my straight friends that gay icons like Liberace and the Village People were not representative of my daily reality. As much as I had bristled at being told how to be gay by other gay men, I turned out to have plenty of judgments of my own. But instead of judgments, I should have had gratitude toward all those who were more out there than I was. As a young gay adult, I knew the very basics of the story of the Stonewall Uprising. That in the early hours of June 28, 1969, patrons of a gay bar in Lower Manhattan got fed up with police raids and fought back. The raids were for the simple crime of being LGBTQ. These protesters were not well-behaved or low-key. They were not wearing button-down shirts or holding peaceful candlelight vigils or staying home and writing well-reasoned letters to the editor. None of those things had brought about the change they were seeking. So instead, they stayed in the streets and made noise and even threw bricks and broke things. They were mad and fighting back. Drag performers and trans women of color were front and center. At one point, some of them even formed a dance kick line to bring some party to their protest. Had the young adult version of me been around in 1969, I might have fretted about the destruction of the riots and deemed them counterproductive. But the Stonewall Uprising was very productive in calling attention to the fact that police had been regularly harassing and brutalizing people who were just being themselves. And those human beings who were farthest on the margins led the way, sparking a much more visible push for change. They had not made my life more difficult. They had made the world a more open place. And one place that was particularly open was where I went to college, the University of Wisconsin-Madison. As a high schooler, I'd made the choice to enroll there for 3 reasons. It had a good journalism school, it was cheap, and it seemed like it would be a good place to come out. It was, in fact, all of those things, and Madison's openness about sex and sexuality was life-affirming and life-saving. A few months after I took the gay class, my university made an appearance in the New York Times for hosting in the heart of campus an event called the Condom Olympics. This included numerous games and activities, as well as a volleyball tournament that used round, inflated objects that were clearly not volleyballs. The AIDS epidemic was roaring around the world and had devastated gay communities on the coasts. But those of us in the middle of the country who had recently come out, we had advance warning. Those of us with access to education and healthcare had full information. We knew, so more of us had the chance to survive. As the current pandemic reminds us, place, policy, and prevention play huge roles in determining who lives and who dies. When I was a young adult here in the Midwest, you could hardly go anywhere in the LGBTQ community without someone offering you a free condom. But a full 10 years after those Condom Olympics, I found myself in Atlanta for a conference. A bunch of us went to one of those gay mega clubs where just about everything imaginable was on offer. But there was not a condom to be had anywhere on the premises. "Oh no," the locals told us, "you can't get a condom in a bar. We don't do that here." This was 1999, nearly 20 years into the HIV epidemic and 30 years after Stonewall. Members of a marginalized community in a conservative state didn't have easy access to protective measures that could save their lives. It's tragic how familiar that sounds today. The solution to an epidemic being ignored is not to sit quietly and hope someone notices when you politely ask for your life to be saved. The solution for addressing the lack of progress in fighting AIDS was for protesters to make a lot of noise. The group known as ACT UP did just that. They got arrested protesting on Wall Street to put pressure on pharmaceutical companies. They protested outside slow-moving federal agencies in Washington, bringing tombstones as props and lab coats stained with fake blood. And they succeeded in speeding up the way drugs were tested. They managed to get the attention of and align themselves with one of the younger scientists at the National Institutes of Health, Dr. Anthony Fauci. Fauci became a leader in the fight against HIV long before he became a household name in the time of COVID-19. The solution to an epidemic being ignored is not to sit quietly and hope someone notices when you politely ask for your life to be saved. These words equally apply to police killings of Black Americans. If love and reasoned argument were enough to solve the problem would have been solved long ago. Some problems can be solved by love or reasoned argument, but racism and systemic anti-Blackness in particular are not among those problems. Many Minnesotans of goodwill, myself included, got confused about how social change happens back in 2012. That was the year of the campaign against the anti-marriage amendment that was on the ballot. That campaign focused on one-on-one conversations to persuade persuadable people not to restrict the freedom to marry. The campaign worked, love and reason ruled the day, and LGBTQ people and their allies rightfully celebrated. But unfortunately, this was not a harbinger of how other kinds of social progress would occur in the future. It was instead a glorious anomaly. Homophobia is terrible and deadly and real, but America as a whole is much more invested in racism and white supremacy than it ever has been in homophobia. Many white families find their way toward embracing the LGBTQ members in their midst. They are less likely to have to find their way toward embracing Black people, who often remain a distant other. Love and reason are wonderful things, but they are not the answer to ending racism. Dr. Ibram Kendi is one of the leaders who makes this case. I've talked about Kendi's work before, and his name may seem familiar because his new book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, is atop the New York Times bestseller list. We have been taught that ignorance and hate lead to racist ideas, lead to racist policies, Kendi says. If the fundamental problem is ignorance and hate, then your solutions are going to be focused on education and love and persuasion. But of course, the actual foundation of racism is not ignorance and hate, but self-interest, particularly economic and political and cultural. What Kendi is pointing to is the fact that our current economic system is hugely dependent on racial disparities and on the undervalued labor of Black and brown bodies. Without neglected neighborhoods, there wouldn't be good neighborhoods and the corresponding accumulation of white wealth. Without large numbers of non-white inmates to lock up, the entire prison industrial complex and the wealth it diverts would collapse. Without low-wage essential workers on the front lines or in the farm fields, white-collar workers couldn't safely be working from home. Society is structured on a foundation of racism, making racism much harder to fight, and making it much harder to motivate white people to dismantle or even see white supremacy culture. I'm reminded of a quote I first shared a few years ago from Hari Ziad, a quote that seems as relevant as ever. Ziad is a non-binary African-American writer and activist who kept being asked, "Do you hate white people?" "No," Ziad answered. "I hate your fake concern for my well-being that reaches its limits as soon as it asks you to make a change or be uncomfortable. I hate the way you continue to go about your day while we die. I hate the way you continue to go about your way while we die." That's what those ACT UP demonstrations were about. Getting the attention of the privileged majority who were going about their day while a form of genocide ripped through the LGBTQ community and communities of color. That's what the worldwide uprisings in the wake of the murder of George Floyd were about. Disrupting the going about your day that the vast majority of white people have done as Black people have continued to die at the hands of police. What's different this time is that unprecedented numbers of white people have taken to the streets to support the movement for Black lives. In a similarity to Stonewall, Black Lives Matter was initiated by queer, trans, female, and non-binary people of color. A reminder that people on the margins know best what is wrong with society and what needs to change. The sight of white support in the streets, which was almost entirely absent just a few years ago in places like Ferguson, is welcomed, but it's also viewed with some wariness. Dr. Karen Wills, an African-American physician who took part in a protest near the Lincoln Memorial, is among those feeling hopeful. Asked about the presence of white protesters, she told the Washington Post this: "Some people out here are just curious. They'll have a sign, post on social media, and life will go on. But for some of them, it really will spark change." On the much more wary side is Trey Johnson, an African-American freelance writer on race, culture, and identity. He penned a recent commentary for the Post titled, "When Black People Are in Pain, White People Just Join Book Clubs." Whew. Johnson's point is not that book clubs can't be valuable, it's that they're often an end in themselves, a point of piety, rather than the beginning of accountability and meaningful action. Over the past month, the world has had a refresher course on what meaningful action can look like. It can look like strategic, disruptive protests, coupled with general demands such as stop killing us, and specific policy goals such as reimagining or even replacing the agencies charged with keeping the public safe. This reminder of the value of protest may be useful as the tensions and challenges of 2020 rage on across multiple areas of public life. I personally am hoping for disruptive actions to protest voter suppression and the inhumane conditions at our southern border. And I'm hoping more people are ready to protest rising white nationalism and authoritarianism. And of course, this weekend, Pride Weekend, is an annual reminder of the value of making some noise. We won't be gathering by the tens of thousands at festivals or parades today, but we can still celebrate the value of being loud and proud. Whether that noise is the sound of rage and grief outside the Stonewall Inn or outside the National Institutes of Health, or the sounds of a joyful community proclaiming, "We're here, we're queer." Out of the closet and into the streets isn't just a slogan. It's a bold action that has changed millions of lives. May the current momentum of protest and progress continue. May there be fewer armchair allies and more accomplices. And may this moment we are in yield whole new ways of being and collective liberation for the full rainbow of humanity. May it be so, and happy Pride.
Thanks for listening. You can find much more about humanism and what's happening at First Unitarian Society in Minneapolis by visiting our website at firstunitarian.org.